What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of FGC Behind the Smoke. It's your boy, Adamo. I am actually recording this solo, and I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of weird. I mean, I got Francesco here with me, so I got some company, but I don't have Boris here with me. I don't have a guest. It's just me, and I'm lonely. So, yeah. Okay, just kidding. No, I am actually recording this alone, so this is gonna be interesting. This is gonna be first time doing this, so yeah, if I start talking to myself, just ignore it. Okay, so once again, welcome back. Today's episode is going to be a Q&A. So we recently posted a poster on our Instagram for you guys to submit questions to us so we can cover them for you here on this episode, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So why don't we jump right into it? Okay, first question. Let's see here. Adamo, why are you so handsome? Oh, thanks. Who is that submitted by? Oh, submitted by me. Okay. All right. Okay, just kidding. Let's get serious now. Okay, so we have a question from one of our listeners, Justin. Justin, thanks for listening to the podcast, buddy. Appreciate it. So, preparing for a Chiefs interview, is it any different than preparing for a panel interview, and what should I expect? Okay, so it is a little bit different. Yes. You typically want to prepare the same way, right? You want to be able to provide your examples within that STAR format that we've been talking about so much on this podcast. But typically with the Chiefs interview, they're looking for something different, right? So your regular panel interview, right? They want to know, your understanding of the job, your team dynamics, right? The ability to fit in with the team, decision making, basically how you're gonna perform, right, in the fire hall. Your reason why you want to be a firefighter, that kind of stuff, right? That we've covered quite a bit on this podcast. Chiefs interviews are a bit different, right? They're kind of looking more into your integrity, your emotional maturity. They're really more interested to see how you're going to represent the department, right? Because they don't want to hire somebody that could potentially represent the department in a negative light, right? So it is not that the the regular panel interview is not professional. It is, right? They want to assess your professionalism in that as well. But with the chief interview, it is a bit more of, hey, is this person going to be a problem, or are they going to be an asset over the next, 30 years? How are they going to conduct themselves in public? How are they going to represent this department, right? So preparing for it, I would say prepare the same way that you would for your regular panel interview with the recruitment team, but just expect some more questions based around, representation of the department, times that you've displayed professionalism. They could throw in there some conflict questions when it comes to, possibly dealing with a citizen who's approached you and, is upset with you because you're, having a coffee and they're claiming that, they pay your salary. How are you going to deal with that situation, right? So really they're looking more on a professional representing the department kind of a level, as opposed to, with your typical panel interview with the recruitment team. It's going to be more of if you're a good fit, within the halls, and if you're going to be good at your job and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So yeah, Justin, thanks for submitting that, buddy. Much appreciated. And also thanks for listening to the podcast. Next question. Let's see here. Okay. Next question is from Tristan. What is something you didn't know about the fire service that you wish you knew before getting hired? Good thing or negative thing? Okay. That's a really good question. Thanks, Tristan. And thanks for listening to the podcast. One thing I didn't know about the fire service that I wish I knew. As much as we have such great camaraderie and there's that family feel and that team mentality within the fire service, firefighters are also known to eat their young, so to say. There are people within departments that are just waiting for somebody to make a mistake or to up on something so they can spread a rumor. It's kind of like high school in that sense sometimes, and that's one thing that I wasn't really aware of when I first got on, but you come to recognize it pretty quickly when you hear lots of rumors going around. Typically most rumors are totally inflated and exaggerated. One thing that I would say is if you're hired on somewhere, or get hired on somewhere and you hear a rumor about somebody, just ask that person directly. Try not to continue spreading rumors, because it's like that game of telephone, right? Where somebody tells you something, you tell somebody the same thing, but maybe that person kind of changed the story a bit. And by the time it gets around to the last person, the story's completely changed, right? So it is a negative thing, it is unfortunate, but it's also the reality of the culture within the fire service, and not just the fire service, right? You kind of get that everywhere, wherever you're working in large groups of people. But that is one thing that I would say I didn't know going into the fire service, and I don't think it's a great thing, but it's also one of those things that I don't think you'll ever really be able to change, right? There's always going to be somebody who's wanting to gossip or wanting to spread rumors, or whatever the case might be, right? So Tristan, thank you very much for that question. Next question is from Nolan. What's a good way to get experience with medical calls before getting hired? Okay, this is a really good question. So there's a lot of different ways that you can get experience with medical calls. You could obviously become a volunteer firefighter, right? You'll definitely get experience there. If you can get into a paramedic role, you can get great experience there. But if you're looking for something that is, maybe more volunteer based, there's a lot of different volunteer organizations that you can sign up for, where, you can go to, say, concerts or hockey games or whatever, and you can be a volunteer there to provide first aid. And it's a good way to get experience. It looks good on the resume, right? Another way too is lifeguarding. There's many different options. I would recommend looking at finding somewhere to volunteer within your community where you can provide first aid, right? Even at big events, like, say, right now it's Remembrance Day, so Remembrance Day parade. Most cities have some form of a Remembrance Day parade. They could be looking for volunteers for, working at first aid booths and that kind of stuff, right? So those are kind of the options that I would look at. You can also, depending on where you work, if you work in a trade, you could also get medical experience by signing up to be, one of the first aid attendants on the job site. So there's many different options for this. I would say the best thing to do, depends where you live. I don't know where you live, Nolan, but I would say best thing to do is to just jump online and start looking at volunteer organizations that are specifically looking for first aid attendants. Again, great thing to have on your resume. Potentially get some decent scenarios happening that you could also be able to touch on in your interview when it comes up. So Nolan, thank you very much for the question, and thank you for listening to the podcast. Do firefighters and cops not like each other? Okay, this is a good question, because this is there's always this kind of rumor going around that there's this like rivalry. From my experience, this is false. Those are brothers and sisters in blue. I know for the department that I work in, we work very well and quite often alongside the cops. And they've always been good to us, and we're always good to them. Sometimes we like to throw shots at each other, just, playful stuff. There is a bit of a maybe competitive rivalry for who's the better first responder, which is obviously firefighters. But no, from my experience, it's not like how you hear it sometimes over social media or whatever, right? Where, there's this idea that cops and firefighters hate each other. That's not true at all from my experience. And obviously I can only talk about my own personal experiences. I can't really talk for anybody else or other departments. I've seen videos online of cops arresting a firefighter because of where his apparatus was parked, and they told him to move it and he said no. And so I'm sure there is, out in the world, there is some animosity towards each other in certain areas maybe, but like I said, from my experience, it's all been positive. So yeah, I wonder if this is a cop who sent this in, or somebody maybe trying to be a cop. Okay, thanks for that question. Okay, next question. What are firefighters' responsibilities when there isn't an emergency? Okay, so that's a good question. So there's a lot of stuff around the halls that typically need to be done. Basically you're living at the hall, so you want to treat it like your home, right? So You're always cleaning. Sometimes we jokingly say we're really high paid janitors. So you're always taking care of the hall, the equipment, the trucks, all that kind of stuff, as well as trying to do drills. Obviously fitness is a very important part of this job. So typically we try and get a workout in as well. Some departments you cook together. Some other departments, you have to bring in your own lunch. So that really depends on the department. Another thing too is we don't just respond to emergency calls. We also respond to routine calls as well, right? So that could be a lift assist. So for example, say, a senior has fallen out of their bed, they have mobility issues. You can respond routine to that and just go and help them, pick them up, put them back in bed. We also get a lot of calls for elevators, people getting stuck in elevators. So it's not always these, high adrenaline calls, going to fires and vehicle accidents and medical calls. We also do get some, more mundane routine calls that maybe a lot of people aren't aware of that we do, right? Water problem calls, we get those too. Somebody's house is flooding or somebody hit a sprinkler, it's flooding out. Sometimes we have to go and shut off the water or use a sprinkler wedge to stop the sprinkler from going off. So, there's a lot of stuff that we do throughout the day that isn't just responding to emergency calls, right? How do you stay in shape and maintain the necessary physical fitness? Okay, so for those of you who've listened to the podcast regularly, I harp on this all the time about fitness, how important it is, right? Fitness is one of those things that you're in control of how fit you're going to be, right? So this is really up to you. Yes, we do get to work out at the hall, but many times that workout is interrupted by calls coming in, right? The best thing I would say to stay in shape and maintain that necessary physical fitness is you need to come up with a routine on your days off. And you need to be going to the gym on your days off. You can still work out at the hall when you're on shift. But with a lot of departments switching over to a 24-hour shift and, some departments in the States being 48-hour shift, you're only there for a certain amount of time, right? So, if you're only there twice a week for 24-hour shifts and you're only working out twice a week, that's really not enough to maintain and stay in shape for this job. You do need to have something outside of the job that is requiring you to exercise and maintain your fitness. Now, that could be sports. It could just be lifting weights. I always recommend to lift weights as well, even if you are doing sports. If, like, let's say you're a soccer player or something like that, obviously you're going to have great cardio, which is awesome, but you also need some strength too, right? Because our equipment is heavy, people are heavy, and when shit hits the fan and you got to pull somebody out, you don't want to be thinking to yourself, I'm not strong enough to do this, right? So, I'd recommend finding a workout routine that works for you and also switch it up, every 6 to 8 weeks, right? Because our bodies do become accustomed to these workouts that we do. So it's good to add in some other stressors, right? By switching up your workout, working some different muscle groups. You could be doing like a 5x5, strength training program for, 6 weeks. And then maybe you want to switch it up and you want to do something that requires a bit more endurance or whatever, right? I don't do CrossFit, but CrossFit is one of those types of workouts that really you kind of get a bit of everything out of. You get some strength training, you get endurance, you get cardio. You're working on those fast twitch muscles as well as those slow twitch muscles. We actually have a guest coming in on the 21st, so I'm not too sure when that episode will air, but he is a captain at a fire hall, but he also owns a CrossFit gym. So if that's something you're interested in, just make sure you pay attention to when that episode comes out, because we'll be talking a lot about exercise and CrossFit and, all the benefits that provides for firefighters and stay in that peak physical shape. What does it take to prepare for emergencies, and what is the training like? Okay, this is a good question. So I think I'd break this down into two separate areas, right? So one, I think for preparing for emergencies, there's a big mental side of that too, right? Breath work, controlling the adrenaline, keeping your mind clear. Some people meditate in the mornings, whatever it is that, helps you have that clarity, so that way when you show up to work, you're mentally prepared. Find something that helps you with that. As you guys know, like for me, it's jujitsu is a big thing for helping me with my mental clarity, and it definitely helps me mentally prepare for shift the next day. Another thing too is also getting good sleep the night before your shift is going to help you out a lot mentally, right? The other side of it is kind of the more tactical stuff, right? Preparing for emergencies. Well, you've heard us say before that when shit hits the fan, you sink to your level of training, right? So it's important, like even after you finish the academy and stuff, it's so important to stay up to date on skills. And maybe you haven't caught a hydrant in 2 years. Well, yeah, it's a pretty simple task, catching a hydrant, but you know what? Why not have a couple runs at it just in training and practice, just to keep that muscle memory going, right? And then as far as like what's the training like, well, that differs from department to department. Okay, so some departments could be, depending on where they are located geographically, they might have an element of search and rescue training, but typically most of the time the training is fairly intense, right? They want to get you up to the standard that you need to be at, and there's a lot that's being asked of you, as there should be, right? Because the public asks a lot of us, right? So yes, the training can be pretty intense, but it's a good thing. It's all about the mindset that you have going into it. If you're going into it and it's intense and you're like, this is ridiculous, well, then maybe this isn't the job for you. But if you're going into it and it's super intense and you're like, this is awesome, like I like the intensity of this. This is going to help me, be better at the job and help protect the public better. That's the right mindset to have going into it, right? What are the qualities you value most in a new crew member? It's a great question. It's like I assume you're asking about a probie coming on. One thing is work ethic, for sure, right? We want to see somebody who is a hard worker, who doesn't need to always be told what to do around the hall. Someone who can kind of figure out for themselves. They don't need too much direction. They can kind of start some projects on their own, whether it's, hey, I'm going to clean all the windows of the hall, or whatever the case might be. But somebody who's a bit of a self-starter, has a good work ethic, who is humble, and who is able to take constructive criticism and then learn and grow from that criticism. That to me are probably the best qualities to have. And obviously somebody who takes the job seriously, right? You can tell when somebody wanted to be on the job because they wanted the status of being a firefighter, as opposed to somebody who truly wants to do the job and be good at the job, right? So yeah, so good attitude, good work ethic, someone who's a self-starter, they can think for themselves a bit, some emotional maturity. Those kinds of things are something that I personally look for when it comes to qualities for a probie. How can the public support the fire department? That's another good question. Okay, so well, there's a bunch of different ways, right? But I think a big thing is obviously most fire departments have their own charitable society. So basically, they do a lot of charity stuff, right? We do a lot of boot drives for muscular dystrophy, and there's so many different charities or charity events that we do every year where we volunteer our own time outside of work to support these great causes. One thing that members of the public can do is come and show up and show support, and maybe donate some money towards some of these initiatives that the fire department has. I would say that's a big way of helping support the department, specifically when it comes to the volunteer initiatives that we do. Another way that the public can help support the fire department is, one, being fire smart within their own homes, right? Try and mitigate clutter. We do get calls for hoarder homes and stuff like that. And in those situations, if there's a fire in there, it's really difficult for us to get in there and effectively put out the fire, as well as try and find somebody potentially and rescue them out when, there's so much stuff in the way, right? So that's one thing. Another thing is, avoid putting metal in microwaves. It happens. People do that, and, that causes a fire. Just being more fire conscious of what's happening in your own home. Say you got a family, and you got young kids and stuff. Planning or creating like a fire escape plan, right? Like if there were to be a fire in the house, how are you guys going to get out of the house safely? We do get calls from people sometimes where the smoke alarm's beeping and they're not too sure why, and typically it's a battery issue, right? So if they can be more aware of that kind of stuff and kind of take care of that kind of stuff, it allows us to be available to respond to more emergency type situations, right? Again, thank you everybody for submitting these questions. Like I said, this is my first time doing this solo, and I'm not going to lie, it's kind of weird. Like I said, it's a little bit lonely. But anyways, if you guys have any further questions, or if you're listening to this for the first time and you didn't know that we were doing a Q&A, feel free to DM us, or you can send us an email. But yeah, go ahead and feel free to send us any questions you have, and we'll get back to you, as well as with your consent, we will also add it to the next Q&A episode that we do, just so other people who possibly have the same question as you, they can get an answer as well. We also have some commercials that we recently filmed that are going to be coming out. We're also going to create a blooper reel of some of the outtakes of our commercials. They're pretty funny, so we think you guys will get a good laugh out of those. So those will be uploaded onto our Instagram in the near future here.
So we have just created our Patreon program, and it's online. We'll put a link in the description of this episode. It's got all our freebies on there. So it's got resume templates, the interview checklist,
the competitive edge checklist.
Yeah, competitive edge checklist.
And we're also going to be diving into more in-depth interview episodes and hiring process stuff. And we're going to be posting it on there. It really does help us out, because then we're able to pay Francesco for producing this podcast. If it wasn't for him, we'd be hooped.
You guys missed the part where we were just trying to turn this microphone on before this episode.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we wouldn't be anywhere without him. So we'd like to start paying him a lot more.
And it's also going to be a way for us to just upgrade to better audio equipment, better cameras, better lighting, and all that kind of stuff to bring you guys a better experience with this podcast.
Yeah, and that was your idea, actually, Damo, with the whole going over every interview question kind of in depth and really getting into the interview panel stuff.
Yeah, we'll be going into that in really great detail, really breaking apart the questions and just talking about like what they're actually asking in these questions, right? And yeah, it's going to be good. It's going to be a lot of info, a lot of really, really good info.
And if it's not, let us know. We also have a chat group in there as well on Patreon.
That's right.
So if there's, guests you want us to see, bring on, or if there's questions you want us to ask or talk about on the podcast, you're more than welcome to ask us on there.
Yeah, for sure. And like when it comes to those behavioral / situational type questions, we can break down a question and talk about it for probably half an hour. Yeah. Right. Just one question.
Easily.
So there's going to be a lot of really good info on that. And like we said, it's going to really help support the podcast so we can upgrade better equipment and also keep Francesco around so that way there is a podcast.
Chaining him down to the table would be too cruel.
Yeah. Right on. Once again, guys, thank you very much for listening, and we'll chat soon. Bye.